guys, I'm Maria from Pink Pony Design, and today we're going to be making a Singapore Sling Bag together. This is by far my own personal favorite pattern still. This is the pattern, as you can see, that I made the most of. I keep making them. Every time I get a new nice vinyl or fabric, I kind of have to have a Singapore Sling Bag in. So that's why I also now have expanded the pattern with some new flat shapes. You can see this one and also this one up here with the edge metal edge trim from Emmeline bags. And there's also a couple of more shapes that are coming in the new flat pack. Anyway, this is the Singapore Sling Bag. It's this perfect everyday bag for me because I can fit my basics in it, my phone, my wallet. You have a zipper pocket here that are very neatly hidden. I'll show you how to make that. There's also open pockets. I use that for my phone. Oh, this is really dark. It's really hard to see inside, huh? Let's take another one with a lighter interior. Here you go. There you can see the zipper pockets better, and also the open pockets. So you can make this bag in pretty much any fabric and with pretty much any kind of lock. Today I will actually be making it with a magnetic lock because I will be putting on one of those edge trims at the end. So I think that would be kind of a neat look to just have the edge trim on the front showing. And I have prepped everything. So what we're going to do now is just set up the camera for filming so you can see what I'm doing instead of me. And then we'll get started. Okay guys, let's begin. So since I'm going to be doing my Singapore Sling Bag a little differently than from the original pattern, I'm gonna start by skipping all the way to step 11 basically, or 10. Step 10, yeah. And I'm gonna skip doing the decor strap because I want the front smooth, or the front of the flap smooth. And I'm gonna be doing a metallic trim. I don't know where I put that one, but I'm also gonna be using magnetic snaps instead of a turn lock. So I'm gonna show you how to do that too. I figured I will be showing you some alternative construction instead of exactly what you can read in the pattern, so you kind of can see the versatility and how much you can actually mix and match and change this pattern up. Anyway, so what I've done is to prepare this for a magnetic snap, and I've done that by pressing a small piece of Decoville light onto the lining side of my flap. And I'm gonna start this whole process by marking where I'm gonna put the male part of my metal snap. So what I've done, the reason why I put this a little bit up is because when I put the metal edge trim on later, I don't want this to be in the way and creating bulk, so that's why it's almost an inch up from the edge. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna mark the middle by folding this in half. There we go. I'm gonna do this so you can see what I'm doing. I just make a little mark. And then I take my washer, my metal washer, and I center that on the mark. And I make little marks for the legs. And I also make little marks on this piece of Decoville Heavy that I'm gonna be putting behind this to give it some extra support, since we only got one thin layer of fabric there. Or actually we have one layer of fabric and one layer of G700 interfacing, so it's a thinnish woven interfacing as well. There we go. Let's make some holes. So I'm gonna make a small slit with my seam ripper where I want my magnetic snap to be. Like that. And like that. There we go. I'm gonna, oops, from the right side, since we want to be able to close our bag, I make the slits slightly smaller. Oops, apparently too small. Slightly smaller than I want them to be because I know they will kind of flex a little with use. So I'm kind of forcing this through. A little bit of violence is always good. There we go. That should, no, maybe that's too low. No, this should be good. Yeah, let's hope that's good. Otherwise, you laugh with me, not at me. And I'm gonna make holes in this one too, so I can thread that on. Here we go. Put on my washer. Now put on my fabric and then interfacing, not fabric. There we go. Okay, the reason why, there we go, and then the washer, and then we bend this outwards so we get it as flat as possible. There we go. Now, I made these perfectly fitting, but then I didn't make the holes in the right place, so I'm gonna trim this down so that it doesn't get in the way of the metal trim later. There we go. So now that should be out of the way. That's what you get for preparing nicely, right? So typical me. Do as I say, not as I do. That should be my mantra. Anyway, there we go. We have our male part of the magnetic snap done. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew the flap together. And I have one side with foam interfacing that I have fused to the exterior using Heat and Bond Light, which is a fusible web, because I really like soft and stable by Annie's foam interfacing, and I really want to use that, but it doesn't come with a fusible back, so I make my own. I have a video on that too here on YouTube if you want to see exactly how I do that. So I'm gonna do this with my foam interfacing side up, because then I can sew right next to my foam interfacing and use that as a perfect seam allowance guide. And I'm sorry if I sound exhausted. It's because of my medication and also because of the heat. It's 30 degrees Celsius here today and it's so warm, and I can't have the AC on because then you wouldn't hear me. It's not a modern thing. So, anyway, I've snapped these together right sides to right sides, and I'm going to sew all the way around but leaving the long flat side open. I'm using a zipper foot so I can sew right next to this interfacing but not on it. And there we go. I can back stick shape properly to make sure it's secure. I haven't please done being turned. And I am a super slow sewer. Oh, I should probably have checked my tension before I started this. Oh, it's good. So if you get tired of this early on, I totally understand, because this is not going to be fast. But I'm really trying for your sake. Normally this is like half this speed, because I'd rather do it just once and not have to seam rip, because I hate seam ripping. That has to be like one of the most boring things to do with this hobby, right? There we go, all the way around. Last piece. There we are. There we go. And now I'm gonna grab my, at least I hope I'm gonna find my, yeah, there we go, my zigzag scissors, and I'm gonna trim the corners, the rounds, the round corners, so they look nice when we turn them. There we go. And this one. There we go. And and we turn. I'm getting so warm already. This little turning exercise is already making me sweat buckets. There we go. So here we have our flap. And I'm just gonna pop over to my pressing station. And actually, no, maybe I don't need that. No, let's do it like this. I'm gonna use my favorite, I would say, presser foot, which is the compensator foot, which will allow me to stitch like perfectly around the edge. But I'm gonna see if I can find exactly the one I wanted. If I had been a neat and proper person, I would have prepared this before I started making this video. Okay, let's go with this one. This is a Teflon version. It has a little bit more seam allowance. I would say it's about 1/8 of an inch, but a generous one. There we go. Oh, by the way, if you don't have this type of machine, but a household machine, you can use your stitch in the ditch foot for this. I will grab it and show you later. What I'm going to do is so this is the front side with the fur. That's my dog. Apparently someone's here. And I'm going to just like roll this between my fingers and kind of push the back behind the front so that you don't see the seam after we've done this top stitching. So I'm just going to place a couple of clips here to kind of give me a bit of support. So I'm basically just pulling this lining away and under as I'm doing this. You can also, if your fabric allows, like mine would, but I didn't want to move the camera, do this a bit at your pressing station with your iron and kind of just press this into place. And now I'm doing like I would with a vinyl, for example, and just kind of rolling it between my fingers. There we go. Hope you can see this, because I realize as I'm doing this that my arm is kind of constantly in the way. So I really hope, I start to look at this, that you can see what I'm doing. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to lengthen my stitch length to almost 4. And I'm going to be guiding this with my fingers a bit as well to make sure this doesn't pop out. And then I just gently let the edge of the presser foot guide my fabric. I'm kind of pushing it into the edge of the compensator foot as I'm sewing. I'm so happy with my knee lift, by the way, which allows me to keep both hands on what I'm making, but at the same time lift my presser foot. So I can readjust my position with the needle down. It's super convenient, especially when you're sewing curves. So just kind of push my leg a little into that and it lifts the presser foot really nicely. Right. There we go. So that's the flap. Nice, right? I wasn't super careful here, but since I'm gonna have the metal edge here anyway, it's not gonna show. I'm gonna put that on later because it's gonna be in the way when we turn the bag. So the flap is finished for now, and we're gonna continue according to the pattern. And I'm trying to do this in the right order, you know. It's not easy for me. So what we're going to do now is sew the flap to the back side. So then I have to decide which of these two I want as the front of my bag and which I want as the back. So I'm going to just kind of lay this on top and see which look I prefer. think, ooh, that was difficult. They're both gorgeous. This fabric is so gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah, I'm gonna use this as my front, so this will be my back, and that's where I will be putting my flap. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna center the flap. I'm gonna bring out a ruler to help me. And I think it's supposed to be what? Oh, it just said centered. Okay. You know, I never kind of read my own patterns, so this is like 7/8 of an inch in from each side, so that should be good. If you don't want to measure, you can just fold both pieces in half, make a notch in the middle, and use that to ensure you center it perfectly. So what you need to keep in mind here is that you need the wrong side of the flap up. So wrong side of the flap, right side of the back side of the exterior, and then we're just gonna stitch that down so it stays in place. Oops, where's my gas? There we go. And this is really just a basting stitch, so just kind of at the edge of the fabrics, and it doesn't have to be very well sewn on. There we go. So that will keep that in place, and we're going to continue to do the D-ring tabs. The reason I keep looking at my pattern is so that I'm doing this in an order that you kind of can follow in the pattern as far as possible. So for the D-ring tabs, what we're going to do is we're going to fold the long sides to the long sides in the middle. If you feel unsure, you can of course mark the middle first, and then we're just going to fold them again in half like that, and we're going to sew down the fold. Here we go. And I used a really weird seam allowance for this, but let's just work with it. Normally I would have used a slightly less seam allowance for this, but anyway, it's not important. Will barely be visible anyway. So what I'm going to do is just fold this in half and split it in the middle, because we don't want long ears for our bag sticking out, but just as small as possible, neat little hangers for our D-rings. So I will be needing my D-rings, so that would be good if I had it prepared. So I'm going to go get those. Hang on. So I found some gold D-rings, which was really hard, by the way, and I noticed I didn't have any half-inch ones like the ones I had prepared, so I quickly made slightly wider connectors, D-ring tabs. They are about 1/8 of an inch wider, so they fit onto these slightly wider D-rings. So I just thread them on and fold them in half, and I'll just sew a line of stitching here to kind of hold them in place. There we go. So we have this little finished tab. Dun, dun. There we go. Now we're going to put these onto our exterior. I'm going to just trim some sides, because I really hate when they stick out afterwards. There we go. There we go. So we're going to place them 1 inch down from the top edge, and I place them with the folded side up, not the one with all the folds, because I think that looks prettier when I watch the bag from above. So I'm just gonna clip that in place. There we go. And we do the same on the other side. 1 inch up, folded side up. Clip in place. There we go. Ta-da! And now we're going to sew our exterior together. So I'm going to grab the back exterior and place it right sides together with my front exterior and clip the two together. Go. I'm the worst at putting away my tools, by the way. I've had to really clean before I put up the camera for you guys because I always leave a bit of a mess. If you're making this with a longer flap, just make sure you don't have flap in the seam allowance in the bottom because that will not be fine. I'm going to switch again to my zipper foot, so I can sew right next to my interfacing. Let's close that mess. There we go. So what I do is I actually start over my little tabs, steering tabs, so I can stitch them in place first, and then I just kind of back up and sew back down again. That way I know they won't move and I don't accidentally push them away with my presser foot as I sew. Oh, I should shorten my stitch length. Shorten my stitch length to 1.5. No, 2.5. 2.5. Jesus, it's so difficult. It feels like I'm being watched like 1,000 people, even though this isn't live. It makes me a bit nervous, actually. So ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to do the same thing here. And I put that down there on top of my tab and stitch it down. And I did this from the wrong side. Yeah, this is really ridiculous. I should have put this way. So let's do it correctly now. I put it down on the tab, I stitch the tab down, I backstitch up to the end, and then I sew down. Like I said, for some reason I get a little nervous when you're here watching me sew live. I have no idea why, because it isn't live. Anyway, we've sewn the sides, let's sew the bottom. So there we go. Let's do the corners. So I just put my hand into the exterior and I push it out. And I either choose to put my seam allowances nested like that, or if I'm using a really heavy thick fabric, I might actually choose to press them open to kind of reduce the bulk here. But for now, this is what I'm going to do. So, oh, sorry, I put that in my lap so you can see it. What I do is, I actually usually put a staple here once I've matched up the seam allowances perfectly. That way I know they won't go anywhere and I know I will have a perfectly matched bottom. So I'll do the same here. And make sure I have the bottom seam allowance in the same direction on both sides. Otherwise you'll get some unsightly bulk. I kind of, with my fingers, wriggle and nestle the seams together, and then I just kind of staple them down to ensure they won't move when I'm sewing. This is not that important when working with cotton, but when working with like a heavy or slippery vinyl, this is like actually super convenient with the little clammer metal clammer there to make sure it can't move. So I don't think you can see what I'm doing here because I think the this might be in the way. Yeah, it's totally in the way. It's still in the way. Let me just move this a little. There, maybe you can see now. Hopefully you can see now. Oops. And now I'm going to be really loud because I'm super close to the mic. Anyway, and I just stitched this down edge to edge with the interfacing again. And I'm sitting super far from my machine, so it's really hard to see what I'm doing. So I hope that turned out okay. If you're working with vinyl, I always recommend that you sew an extra seam outside of your first seam. So one here and then one just outside that one, because that way you will strengthen the seam since you can't use very short stitches. And you will also take some of the pressure off the seam for when you turn the bag. There we go. I really hope you can see that. Anyway, we have our corners and we have our bag. So I'm going to put you back to where you were, I think. Ish. Something like that. There we go. I hope that's a good position so you can see what I'm doing. There we go. Yep. And now we're going to start with the interior since the exterior is actually finished. If you want, you can turn this and ensure you haven't accidentally sewn it like a little wonkily, or if you need to tighten up a seam somewhere. But I'm happy with this, so I'm going to put it away. Oh, I also found the metal trim I'm going to use, so that's good. And here we are. So what we're going to do is take our lining, and this is the lining that is in 2 pieces for the zipper pocket. But we're going to start with the actual lining of the zipper pocket. I have my zipper, which is longer than my lining pieces, because that is actually easier for me, because then I can leave the zipper hole out and just kind of push that in the end. So what we're going to do, if you have fabric with direction, it should be upside down now, so the print should be facing me. And then I'm just going to stitch this down. Kind of edge to edge here with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Basically, I'm just basting this in place. I should have backstitched there, but I'm naughty, so I totally forgot. You should make it a habit to backstitch. There we go, backstitched. And then we take the other one and place it the right side up. So the right side of your fabric should be facing that way. And then we fold this out, place this one edge to edge here, and we stitch it down. So the linings will be right sides together. Oops. Oh, of course. Let's try that again, a little further in. And I didn't backstitch. You should backstitch, people. It's a good habit to do as I say, not as I do. There we go. So here we actually have the zipper pocket. And now you decide which way you want to be opening and closing this. And I like to open mine from left to right, so I'm going to leave it like this. Otherwise you can just flip it over like that and you'll be closing it the other direction. But now we're going to continue with the lining. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw the seam allowance here, which is 1/2 inch on this little piece on the wider bottom section. I'm going to draw this because I find it easier. That way I don't have to keep track of anything else but just the line. There we go. And we place these right sides together with the wider part up. And as you can see, these two line up exactly where our mark is instead of at where the seam allowance normally would be. So I'm just gonna stitch this down. Oh no, we need to make another mark. Sorry. 2 inches in, we make a mark on each side, because that's where we're going to be basting instead of sewing. So here we sew like normal, all the way to the mark, back stitch a couple of steps, and then I turn my stitch to the longest possible length for a basting stitch, and then I just baste stitch this all the way to the next mark, and there I turn it back to 2.5 inches, no, 2.5 stitch length, back stitch back to the mark, and sew all the way out, and back stitch. There we go. Ta-ta! And ta-da! So I'm gonna go to my pressing table and press this seam allowance open, and I'll be back in a second. So I have pressed my seam allowance open. So what we're going to do is we're going to be attaching the zipper, and for that I'm going to take some double-sided tape, and this is 1/8 of an inch wide, and I'm gonna stick that to the edges of both sides of the zipper. I don't put it all the way out, since I'm gonna be sewing this closed later, so we'll just leave scant 1/2 inch without tape. Okay. Like that. And then you make sure you get your zipper opening and closing in the direction you want. So you should keep it in the direction you want. So I want it closing and opening from left to right, opening and closing from left to right. So like this. And then we remove the tape covers. There we go. I should be doing this from the other side around. Yeah. So to make this easier to see, make sure I don't mess up, I'm going to measure out 2 inches. There we go, and 2 inches here, since my zipper tape is longer. And I'm going to put this edge to edge with the tape, so that I leave 1/2 inch outside of the mark. And whoops, it's really hard to do this from the other direction than you're used to, actually. So I'm just gonna kind of put that down, centered on the seam allowance that I pressed open. Since our zipper tape is 1 inch wide, it should go down pretty perfectly. And there we go. So before I start sewing, I'm gonna actually just draw out my seam allowance again. So 2 inches from the edge, and 2 inches from the edge. It would have been easier if I had done this before I added my zipper. And there's a reason I do it one way correctly in the pattern, and then when I make it myself, I make tons of mistakes. Anyway, you draw a line for your seam allowance from your marks, 1/4 of an inch away from the seam. There we go. And there we go. So we have drawn out our seam allowances. There where we will be sewing down our zipper. And I'm going to start from the side that has the zipper pull. So I'm going to leave the zipper pull out, and I'm going to start from the side here. And first I'm gonna fold this open so you don't accidentally sew closed your your zipper pocket, because that's really frustrating. Don't ask me how I know. There we go. And I'll be using the pink all over. I'll lengthen my stitch length a little, but not a lot, to about 3. And then I'm actually going to be super lazy and just backstitch this in place later. And I'm following just the drawn seam allowance. There we go. And as I come to the edge here, I go over the edge twice, since that's the place that will be taking the most strain from the zipper pull. So I just kind of extra secure that there. And now I actually stop a little earlier now because I have quite a big zipper pull. So I'm just going to push this out of the way. So what I'm just doing is just pushing this up and out and under. So it's out of the way from where I'm sewing. And I do this usually to save myself some hassle. If you have a flat zipper pull, like I suggest in the pattern, this is not really an issue and you can just follow the pattern. But since I insisted on using this huge zipper pull, I'm gonna be faking it till I make it this way. So I'm just gonna kind of remove this out of the way. There we go. And then I can sew this flat in place. And I just made this look a lot trickier than it actually is. So if you don't use a too big zipper pull, just follow the instructions in the pattern. Let me just get back to here a little to make sure it's secure. So, normally I would pull this out and tie it, but I don't want to spend more time on this now since you guys are watching. So we just, with our seam ripper, open up our basting stitches. And then we can freely move our zipper pull. And I'm just gonna go ahead and remove the threads. It's really pretty with the gold and the pink, I think. So, there we go. And then we fold down this back side and we put this right side up, and I fold this out of the way so I can sew closed my my zipper side pocket, side of the zipper pocket. And we do the same on the other side. So we fold this up. That's why I didn't put tape all the way out to the end of the zipper, so I can easily fold this out of the way. There we go. And now we just cut the excess away. Here. There we go. So they are even. And we're gonna leave this open. I don't bother pressing it anymore. I'm too lazy. So I'm just gonna leave this as it is. And we have a zipper pocket, but with a really nice kind of lining fabric. And there we go. So we're done with this. we're going to go on to the slip pocket for the lining. I think, right? That's the next step. Let me just double check it. Yeah, we need slip pocket. So this is the second piece of the lining. And this is the slip pocket piece. I just fold this in half lengthwise and sew it close with about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And about 2.5 stitch length. Normally I would bother with switching thread to a matching thread, but I'm trying to be a little more chill. Since no one will see this anyway in my tiny bag that I'm going to be using for myself only. So I'm trying to save myself some pain and time, most especially time, since I'm not well. Time is kind of the most precious thing I have, so I want to make things easy for me nowadays instead of hard. So I'm just turning the slip pocket, and then I'm gonna go press this at my pressing station, and I press it so I have the joining seam a little bit up from the bottom, as otherwise I get kind of a bulky seam at the bottom. And this is also a nice way if you have like a pattern on the front and you want some like special piece of the pattern to show, you can kind of adjust it around before you decide to press down. So I'm just going to go give this a quick press before I top stitch. It's much easier for you to watch if I turn on the video, right? So I switched to a compensator foot, and we're going to be top stitching along the long side that doesn't have the seam. So I have increased my stitch length a tiny bit, and I'm just going to be stitching along the top here for a bit of a decorative effect. There we go. And next we're going to put this down. I'm just going to save myself some time and do this now while I have that drawer open. Here we go. We're going to put this on top of our lining piece that doesn't have a zipper pocket. And then we put it 1.5 inch down from the top. So I just use my ruler. I place it 1.5 inch down, and then I just kind of let this lie edge to edge while I clip it in place. Could have kept the other foot on since I'm going to use the same seam allowance for the next seam, but you know, apparently this video thing is making me all nervous. Here we go. I'm just going to stitch that down. So I'm stitching down the bottom now. Now, I'm going to be using this for my cell phone, which I'm using to film this. So normally I would just place my cell phone in this pocket, and I would place a couple of needles around it to make sure it's enough room to take it in and out. But since I don't have my cell phone, I'm going to make an educated guess as for how much space it needs. So I just draw with a non-permanent marker where I want my seams. Yeah, I think that should do it. Sorry, I'm just going to hold this up to my... Yeah, that should do the trick. I have a bit of room on each side, so that should hopefully let me put in and out my cell phone. And then we just stitch this down. be quite careful backstitching at the top, since that's where your seam will have the most strain. I really have to get myself a magnet or something for my scissors, because I keep losing them and I can never find them when I need them. So there we are. I'm just gonna trim off the excess here. And if you've made like just a split in the middle, you can choose to just put a quick seam here to ensure you don't accidentally fold this when you sew your lining together. So we just kind of baste these in place. There we go. And we have pockets. One of the best things with making your own bags, right? You can make as many pockets as you want, and customized pockets for like exactly the things you need. So I know that I will be able to fit my teeny tiny little hand disinfection bottle here after I've sewn this up. So that's going to be perfect. Anyway, I think it's time to sew our lining closed, right? So what I do is I place them. Oh, actually, I'm gonna trim off my excess zipper first. And then I'm going to place these right sides together. And for good habit, open the zipper. We're not going to be turning through this hole, but still. So that's something I do different from the pattern. I actually usually turn from the bottom, especially if I have like a bulky kind of vinyl. I don't have to pull the whole bag through this part, I just have to pull it through this small part in the bottom. So that is something I have changed my method for. So I'm going to sew this closed, and I'm going to sew a tiny bit closed in the bottom, and then leave most of the bottom open for turning. Here, now, we're going to do this properly. We're not going to do this hasty like I normally do it. I'm going to show you how to do it properly. So since the seam allowance is 3/3 of an 1/8 inch, I'm going to draw out my seam allowance here as 1/2 inch. As then, the lining will be nicely, neatly smaller than our exterior, and therefore it will fit inside the exterior much nicer. So that's something I really like to do, is get a nice fitting lining. Makes the bag feel so much more professional, I think. So there, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we stitch this in place. You should use clips. I should do as you should, not as I normally do. I always regret cheating afterwards, but there we go. 1.5 inch seam allowance. No, 1.5 inch seam allowance and 2.5 as my stitch length. And then I sew the bottom little section. I bet you can see my mouth. I steer with my tongue. So I apologize for that. It's just what I do. And now we're going to do the corners, and I do them the same way as the exterior. So I just kind of match up the seam allowances between my fingers. These holes will be slightly smaller since we had a larger seam allowance. And then wiggle them between my fingers so they nest up. And place a clip. And then we do the same thing on the other side. And we make sure we fold the seam allowance in the same direction. Like that. And nest them together, like wiggle them between your fingers. And a little clip. There we go. So, here we are. And this I sew with about the same seam allowance as I used for the other corners, as we don't want the corners to be bigger. We just want we don't want the corners to be bigger. We just want them the same size, so that's why we still use the same seam allowance for that. There we go. There we are. We have our lining and we have our exterior. And now we're going to join the two. So I'm going to trim off the metal and the excess fabric in the corners. You can sew an extra line of stitching here, since I'm just using cotton. I'm not too concerned. There we go. And I'm just going to make sure I say to do this exactly the same as in the pattern. Yeah, right. We turn our lining, since that's the smaller part, right side out, and we put it into the exterior. And here you should take care to get the zipper on the side of the bag that you want it. So for example, I want my zipper towards the back of the bag, so I'm going to put it towards the side that has the flap. So zipper to flap. That's of course personal preference, so if you want it some other way, of course do it your way. There we go. And we're going to start by matching up the corners. There we go. And the same here, matching up the corners. And then I start by placing a clip in the middle, and the same here in the middle, to kind of ease out any fullness on the exterior. So I'm going to clip this all around. Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to go have a drink of water and powder my nose before I continue, so I'll be back in a second. Hi guys! I'm going to be trying to kill two birds with one stone today. So I will be sewing the bag closed on my domestic machine, since I figure most of you have a domestic. And then I will be doing the top stitching on my Juki flatbed machine, since a couple of you have asked me how to do the top stitching on a flatbed. So I figured that would be the best way to kind of show as much as possible with the same bag. Okay, I hope you can see me. I'm gonna take a quick look and just gonna move that up a little. There we go. Yeah, that should do it. So since we have a free arm here, we just will be sewing this all the way around. I'm gonna start on the back of the bag, since that's. I'm gonna put all my clips the wrong way because I was gonna sew this on the Juki, so I'm just going to switch this around quickly. There we go. I was going to sew this on the flatbed machine, so that's why I put them the other way around. But you know, girl can change. There we go, and the last one. Ta-da! So I'm going to be moving my needle to the edge of the presser foot, so I can sew edge to edge with my foam interfacing. There we go, that's max for me. And there we go. And then I just with 2.5 inch, and now I'm looking for my Yuki. I'm just sketching it right next to the foam interfacing like I did when we sewed this together. And then I'm going to stop with my needle down so I can just kind of pull this around a bit. And that's why I should do this all in the same place. There we go. And I use my awl to kind of hold this in place so it doesn't move as I go. It's wonky. It's gonna make sense. There we go. I'm not really used to using you, my little friend. Not when it comes to this stuff. But it's really convenient with a free arm when you're making these smaller things, actually. Don't neglect to love your household machines as well, or domestic machines if you have to, because they are awesome. I always try to sew one of the bags when I make a new pattern design on this loose corner, because I want to make sure that all steps easily can be made on a plastic machine, so that I don't accidentally put too many layers of fabric interfacing or something for a domestic machine. Whoops. And come on. Cannot. There we go. Stay down. Just gonna adjust this a bit. Okay. There we go. Since I made a wider dealing holder. I'm paying for that now because it's kind of in the way. So I should probably put it a little bit further down so I got it out of this way for this, but you know, it's always easier to be clever after the fact, right? There we go, and we're done. Oh, I should also say I usually try to keep the lining slightly up when I sew. Well, it has shifted here. It's not my prettiest work. It's never my prettiest work when I'm filming, apparently. But now we're going to turn this right side out, and we're going to hop back to the Chuki. So. Here we are. Okay, so we're going to turn this, and we will be turning it through the hole in the bottom to kind of make it easier for us. And since this is just cotton and foam, it should go pretty painlessly, actually. There we go. I should try not to keep this out of the camera. Bottomed out. There we go. Oh, you see, that's really neat. And there we are. Okay, so since we will be doing this on the Yuki flatbed, we're going to be sewing this kind of like that, but then we don't see what the stitches look like on the outside. So actually what I do when I sew this on the flatbed is that I turn it inside out again, but only halfway. So I get the lining side. Oh, I kind of really want to put this towards myself, but then I'm out of the camera. I'm just gonna fiddle this out, and I'm sorry if I'm out of the camera, but I kind of need all my strength here because I'm kind of weak. Here we go. And there we go. Ta-da! Or something to that effect. So, then what I'm gonna do is, this is so much tougher when you don't have the AC on. There we go. Kinda sorta hot. Anyway, so I'm gonna close this so I can pull at it. There we go, and here we go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wiggle this between my fingers and kind of push the lining down so that it's lower than the exterior, so it won't be visible on the outside of the bag when we open it. Oh goodness, it's so hot today. It's so warm. I actually had the AC on for a part of this video by mistake, but I was like trying to cool down between filming and I forgot. So I'm sorry if part of the video has a very annoying background noise. Here we are. So you can see I kind of pulled it down so you can see here it's not pulled down, so here you can kind of only see the lining, but here you can see the top of the exterior fabric, and that's what we want, to get a neat, or as neat as possible looking exterior anyway. And then we have a little piece of thread. Okay, so there we go, that should do it. And I'm going to switch to another presser foot. Should not be talking away from the camera, should I? I am the worst at this. So I use, when I'm sewing with cotton, I use my Teflon feed as well, because I didn't want to have to buy like all the sizes in metal as well. So I've been cheaping out and have some of them in metal and others only in Teflon, since they can be used for both vinyl and cotton. That was apparently very hard to say. Oh, and now we're gonna leave our thread tails long so that we can kind of bury them afterwards, so we don't have to backstitch, because that won't be pretty on the outside of the bag. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna, can you see this? I hope you can see this. I'm gonna do something like that and hope that you can see that. I'm gonna do this. I use this compensator or edge. Oh, by the way, if you don't have a compensator foot, if you're working with a domestic machine, use your stitch in the ditch foot with the little guide here. Use that as the guide here, and just move your needle as far to the left as you want to get kind of the distance you want. So I've lengthened my stitch length to 3.5. I'm holding my thread tails, and let's go. I really hope you can see this. So as you can see this way, you can see where you're going on the outside of the bag, even though we are working on the flatbed machine. It requires a bit of wrestling, but it's totally worth it, I think. So this is the hardest part, the corners. So just gonna I missed the AC. Kind of wiggle and wrestle it a bit. If I'd pushed this out better beforehand, I would not have to be this do this much now. But when you try to save time in one end, you'll end up paying for it anyway. So there we go. And I'm gonna increase my pressure foot pressure a bit actually. And I've managed to let this slip out a bit. So even though this seems like such an annoying wrestling match, I actually find it a very convenient way of doing it, as I can see what I'm doing, which I really like. So just kind of hold stuff out of the way with your fingers and you'll be good to go. I hope you can't see my sweaty forehead in this shot. Like I said, it's so warm today. If there had been cooler days coming up, I would have waited, but there are no cooler days left this summer, I think. So I'm just gonna have to work with the temperatures we have. Or maybe, you know, at some point invest in a quieter AC so that I can both film and be cool at the same time. Or cool, I'm not cool, I'm never cool, but you know, temperature-wise anyway. So I'm gonna keep my threads out of the way. And then we're gonna kind of do this edge wrestling match again. And there we go. And don't let the fabric puff up for you, so kind of keep working it with your fingers so it's out of the way. And if you're not trying to show a camera what you're doing, this is much easier, trust me. It's trying to get this part cleared ish, and at the same time getting decent enough stitches that you won't be embarrassed about the bag. That's the problem here. So lift your needle, leave your thread tails long, and cut. There we go. And I'm going to put you back where you were ish. Anyway, I think something like that. There we go. Ah, well, that will do. And we're going to turn this right side out. Again, I know. There we go. And now we can see the end result. There we go. There we go. There we go. That looks nice, right? You have this really neat top stitching here with no lining showing. So, don't worry, I'm gonna press it later. There we go, and I have apparently managed to catch threads. I will clean that later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew this down. So I'm using a self-threading needle to save myself some hassle. And I'm going to pull all of the threads to the back. So I gathered the 2 threads here. This is usually very easy. There we go. And then we're just going to stick that down in an already existing hole. And we pull it up here. So we have all 4 threads on the same side. And we pull and make sure the stitches look nice on the back side as well. And then we just tie these off here. Hope you can see this, otherwise. There we go. Just make a couple of knots. There we go. And then I use the self-threading needle again to thread on all 4 threads. Or at least that was the idea. 3 threads, 4 threads. There we go. And then I'm going to need my protection. And then I pull this down sorry, here in the same hole that I came up in, or very close to anyway, and I pull it out here in the seam allowance of the pocket, and I just pull down so the knot is hidden there, and then I'll just put this away before I lose it. There we go. And then I just have, I trim a bit of this because it's so long, but it will be in the lining of the bag so it won't be visible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this here and push it out through the opening of the pocket and sew it closed. So since I made my stitch like that, I just my seam allowances in different directions, I just clip this up so I can easily sew this down again. There we go, and clip. So now I have like a straight piece where I can sew. There we go, and I'm just going to switch to another pressing foot again. Since I'm using half an inch seam allowance there. Actually, if you want, you can put in the bottom piece first, if you want to do that before you sew this closed, but you can also put it in through the zipper pocket later, so I figured that's what I'm going to do. Just kind of match this up. So this is the lining of the bag through the pocket of the bag. So there we go. This won't be very visible either. I'm sorry about that, but I think you get the gist of what I'm doing anyway. This way I don't have to hand sew close the bottom, but I also can use the bottom as the turning point for my bag, which I find convenient, especially when working with heavy vinyls that are difficult to turn. Just sort of, you know, adjust as I go. This doesn't have to be perfect or even pretty. It'll never be seen. Then apparently I should have stitched this like a couple of stitches longer because I won't be able to go all the way up there. That kind of doesn't matter because it won't be visible anyway. And oh god, sorry. And then I push the lining back through the zip pocket, and the lining will look, once I pressed it, really neat. Because since we sewed this closed on the machine, you'll never see that we had to sew it closed after construction. So now, since I have clearly, of course, naturally, forgotten to cut my bottom pieces, depending on the interfacing, you can use 1 or 2. I usually use 2. And then we will continue with at the pressing station, actually. Yeah. So here I got 2 pieces of heavy interfacing, or 1 piece of heavy and 1 piece of medium fast diffuse, since I really want to use up my scraps for this. So what I do is I actually fuse the 2 together before anything else, so it doesn't end up wonky. This is regular baking paper from the kitchen. I use that so I can just toss it afterwards, since I get quite a lot of glue on it when I do this. So I'm just going to do that so it wakes up. And then I just fold this over and press the 2 together. I do this on full heat for maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Can kind of adjust how I look in the meantime. And then we continue with the rest of it. Let's see, joint. Yes, I can have it. So, or not at all in one end. Let's continue. So, while that heats pleats up and do this. You might be wondering where the closure is, but I want the bag to have its final shape before I put that in, so that's why I haven't put a closure on the front yet. So since with the new flap pack you will be getting a lot of different shapes from the flaps, so I really recommend doing it this way when you do. And since there's so many different screw locks and locks as well, so that's just sort of one way to ensure that you get the closure exactly where you want it. So I'm just going to move this. It doesn't matter if it turns out brown, just wait till it's cold. We can press the bag a little in the meantime actually. I have my baby iron here. Now actually this fabric looks amazing, even though, I managed to tie this one down. There we go. Even though I've been turning and wrestling with it, but I can always give it a bit of a press to sort of sort out any little residual wrinkles from the turning. If you have a vinyl bag, you would be pressing it only from the inside. I won't be doing that yet, but only from the inside, so that you don't melt your vinyl, but at the same time you kind of, with the heat, makes the vinyl look nicer and flatter. So what we do is we put this bottom into the bag, and I'll sort of fiddle a bit with it so I get it up into the corners properly, and all the way down. And then when that's in place, I'm gonna make sure everything else is in place too. I'm gonna close this up, even though we haven't sewed it closed yet. I'm gonna push down all my lining and make sure it looks nice and neat in the bottom, like that. And then I'm gonna press the bottom to the bottom, to the bottom, like this. So I'm holding it and pressing it from the inside with my fingers, and when my fingers get hot, that's usually enough time for the glue to kind of stick. Since I have 2 layers of heavy or medium interfacing, so just kind of let that heat up enough, and then continue, all the way. If you're uncomfortable with this, you can always use, again from the kitchen, a Ava glove or similar, or a piece of scrap just in here so you don't burn yourself. My fingers are rather impervious to heat at this point, as you can see when I try to touch the interfacing, but anyway. Sorry, and I'm also going to do this from the interior. Since my heavy interfacing has glue on both sides, this will allow it to... No, actually I'm really not going to do that. No, that's so stupid. No, since we haven't, we're not going to do that. We're not going to attach the lining yet. We're going to do that afterwards. We're going to attach our lock first, since we're going to have to lift the lining to do that. So, because I have my zipper on the back, so I have to be able to get through to the front. So, do as I say, not as I do. So press it in place from the bottom so you have the final shape of the bag, but don't press the lining in place if you have a fusible, that's fusible on both sides. So we're going to pop over to our desk, or actually I can do that here. Don't have to pop anywhere. I'm just going to go get my magnetic lock and my seam ripper and a pen. And a scrap of heavy interfacing. Here we are. Okay. So now what we do is we're going to mark where we want our closure. So kind of fold up the bag as you want it to look when it's done. So you want to be able to close it, but not like too tightly so you can't get stuff into it. So I think I wanted something like that, so I have a little bit of room, but not super tight. And then I just kind of sneak a peek. Here, I hope you can see my head's going to be in the way, but I'm going to show you. later. And just kind of do that, and you just lift this a little and make a mark where the male part of the lock will meet the bottom. So this mark is slightly below where I want this, so I'm going to keep that in mind when I do the markings. So I'm just going to place my mark slightly up from this, since I didn't really get my pen in there as I was trying to show you guys what I was doing. There we go, and then I just make my little marks. Again, this is much easier if you're not trying to show someone what you're doing. So you just I just moved this a bit, since that's my mark, and that was like the edge of the closure, and then I just made my new marks there. And then I just double check by closing this that it seems to be good, but honestly it seems like I put it a little too low anyway. So I'm gonna erase those. This is the friction pen, so it's heat erasable, or at least until you put it in the cold. And I'm gonna do this and put it up a bit more. And I make new marks based on my new mark, and then I try again. This is so much easier if you have a turn lock, by the way, since then you have the opening in the lid and you just draw a little mark and then you're done. But since I can't really see what I'm doing here with my magnetic lock, it's not as simple. So there we go, those marks should be good. I'll do the same marks on my heavy interfacing, so I can cut holes in that too. So I just do this so I can give it a bit of extra strength. So then I take the female part of the lock and I make my holes. So what I do is I have my hand in the bag through, and I pulled up my lining out of the way so I don't risk cutting into my lining. So there's no lining behind here, it's all in my hand. And then with my fingers as support, I make my holes. Again, rather make the holes a little too small than a little too big, since you will force them a bit larger when you put this in. Then we just kind of push that in, just a little bit of violence. And then from the lining side of things, I don't know if you can see, but you know the legs are sticking up here. So on the legs, thread on your heavy interfacing. There's no way you're going to see what I'm doing here, so I'm just going to say what I'm doing. Thread on your heavy interfacing over the legs through the holes you already made. Put on your metal washer also over the legs. And again, this is easier in another position. And then just with your finger push the legs in separate directions. That was my dog, that was leaving me. Maybe one of the cats did something she thinks they shouldn't. I'm so darn weak, and it's easier on a flat table. There we go. And there we have our magnetic closure. It's not super pretty, it's the humidity here makes like every hardware look rough after a short while. So we will be able to close our bag now. Ta-da! Like that. And since we want to have the frame, so this is the Emmeline frame, and it's the style B, medium. This basically you just shoot onto the edge of your bag, like so, like that, and then you screw down through the little holes. I hadn't prepared that either, since I'm apparently preparing nothing for this, but I'll show you how it's going to look anyway. So it's going to look like that. It's going to be so pretty. I'm going to be using a metal chain for this, that's why we haven't made a strap. but I think this is just going to be so gorgeous. Anyway, now, since we have installed the front piece of the lock, if this was a turn lock, you just would have drawn through the hole. Hang on, let me get the turn lock. So if this had been this bag and you hadn't applied this yet, you just would have put this here, made a mark through this hole where you wanted this, and just inserted this the same way, pulling out the lining. And since I've sewn up this hole, I won't be able to do that, but pulling out the lining, making your marks and inserting it after you have installed this where you want it. So that's why I also do, I install the lock top last, so I can put it exactly where I think it will look nicest. So for example, if I were to have had a screw lock on this bag, wait, that was off center, anyway, I would have put this on and then made the hole so that I could decide exactly where I wanted my screw lock to be visible in reference to the metal bar. So the only thing left to do really is to sew up this hole, and that I just do by pushing these two in like that between my fingers, and I grab some clips. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. You can of course press this for an even neater result, and then you just either sew this by hand if you are less lazy than me, or you just change your machine color if you haven't got a matching one to a matching one, and sew this down with like a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to sew this closed, and then I'll be finished with my bag. So I'm not really super careful about how this looks, because no one is ever supposed to be in my interior zipper pocket. I just have to check that I turned on this thing. Yes, I did. So I'm just going to sew this down with, again, a compensator foot, since I love them. There we are. So it's not the prettiest, but like I said, it's the fastest way, and I hate sewing by hand when I can avoid it. So I just kind of push that down and push out the corners. There we go. And then I will bring this over to my ironing station again and just iron this in place in the bottom, so that the lining will lie perfectly flat and smooth towards the bottom the entire time, so that you get that nice kind of flat thing once you have ironed it. Not now, but once it's ironed. So the only thing left to do is install the metal edge. So that's what we're going to do. So you remove this cover plastic first. There we go. And then we kind of, you can put a few drops of glue in here if you want, but I might have to use the same frame for another bag for a photo op later, because I haven't received more in the gold color. So I'm just gonna leave it screwed in for now. So to make sure it's the same distance from the edge, I'm just gonna measure. So it's 1 1/4, and that's pretty darn close to 1 1/4. There we go. Yeah, so there it is centered, and then we just flop this over, push it all the way up, and since I managed to push it sideways, I'm gonna measure again. there we go. We'll take the little screws. When I say little, I really mean little. These are tiny. But Emmeline is super sweet and she always puts this in an extra. So the one I lose, I can always replace. Because for some reason I always manage to shoot these tiny things all the way across my sewing room. And that's the wrong, of course that's the wrong one. Hang on a second, I'm just going to go get a smaller one. I brought two ones. So if you don't have a star one that works, you can always use a tiny flat one. These are the ones I use for fiddling with computers too. So they're really, really tiny. You can buy them at most computer shops, like in a kit. And they're perfect for bag making applications too. Sorry, you can't see this, but I just kind of put the little screw into the hole. I make sure the edge of the frame is pushed all the way up to the edge of the flap. And then I screw them in. And I start with the outer two because they kind of guide the others, and I'm slightly pushing with my thumb upwards so that I don't accidentally kind of screw it down off the edge. So I kind of just wanted to mention, in case some of you don't really recognize me from older videos, I'm actually quite sick. I've been diagnosed with Cogan syndrome, which makes me lose my hearing, and it gives me problem with my eyes and my heart. So I'm on quite a lot of corticosteroids since a year and a half back. I'm also on immunosuppressants and a bunch of heart medication. And these have caused me to swell up quite a bit, so I'm really fluffy and puffy in places, which is not fun at all, but that's what you have. So see, I got even, anyway, that's just for, in case anyone was wondering. I got 2 screws left, so I'm going to save these screws in case I manage to shoot more of these away from another manufacturer, because these fit into pretty much all the different hardware ones. So then I have extra. I love Emmeline for that. That's so perfect. So I'm going to be really careful. There we go. So I'm just going to press this and then it's going to be done. But I figured it's actually quite nice. I'm going to show it to you now as it is. So this is my bag. And I'm going to be putting a gold chain on it. I haven't pressed the interior, so it's not perfect yet, but I mean, you've been seeing the construction, so I guess that doesn't matter. You have the really fancy little zipper pocket, which matches the exterior. I think that's so fun. Makes me so happy when I have like a contrasting zipper pocket lining. Makes me really happy. Anyway, that is our new flap pack for the Singapore Sling Bag. And by the time I release this video, that pack will be available for purchase. So you will get 4 different flaps for 2 of these different flames, and also a round one and a super pointy one. So I hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do, and I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or any concerns, I guess, just make a comment and I'll try to answer it as quickly as possible. Thank you so very much for watching. Have a good day.